Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point podcast. I'm Rachael Lyon, here with my co-host, Vince Spina. Vince, how are
Morning,
you?
Rach. I am doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, although I didn't go to New Orleans last week for an event, so dying to hear how that went.
What stays in New Orleans on Bourbon Street stays there. So that's what they tell me. But, no, it was
That's
good. It was a good time. Great city, great people, great food. But we did manage to get some really important and fantastic training to the team all week. So we stayed pretty busy.
That's nice. So a great location to go do that. I haven't been back to New Orleans in years, and I miss the food, really good food.
Every day it was either a po' boy or seafood gumbo. So that's what I ate just about every single day.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
And my wife's from there, so she was very jealous. By the way,
nice.
I was sending her pictures of what I was eating for the day.
Oh, great. I know what I'm having later today. So let me introduce today's guest. I'm so excited to welcome Ross Young. He is the CISO in residence for Teammate. He's also served as the CISO of Caterpillar Financial and divisional CISO at Capital One. And amazing career, has over a decade of experience with the CIA, NSA, and the Federal Reserve Board. And if that's not enough, he's also created the OATS Threat and Safeguard Matrix, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Ross, welcome.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited.
Awesome. So Vince, you want to kick us off today?
Yeah. First of all, Ross, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and very excited about this podcast. The first thing is kind of a CISO and the fact that you communicate with a group of your peers on a daily basis. Obviously, in that world, hacking is something that you and your colleagues have to think about, care about on a daily basis, and we've seen kind of an uptick lately, especially when everybody kind of went home and are working remotely now and all those kind of things. So we're seeing kind of an uptick in hacking, and just wondering, it seems to be happening more often, sometimes more severe, but just wanted to understand, like, from a hacker's behavior, the code of conduct, what do you feel like has changed since we've come out of this, post-pandemic kind of environment?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that we've seen is just really this huge uptick in ransomware groups. If you think about, let's go about 5-10 years ago, you used to just ransom one individual person, right? You would send them a malicious email, they open that, and then you would encrypt their own laptop and say, hey, it's going to be $500 to $1,000 before we enable your laptop to get back. And from that, people said, oh, this is a viable business model. Let's go after bigger fish. And then they went after corporations. And now what happens is, hey, it's $4.5 million that corporations are paying these companies, these bad actor companies. It's not just one individual. It's a whole company of people. And now, guess what? They get money to reinvest and build capabilities. So instead of just, here's what one person could do against you, you're actually going up against companies that have spent time and money to build zero-day exploits and misattrib infrastructure and everything else to make your life harder. And if you're a small company, someone under, let's say, 500 people, you're lucky to have an IT staff of 5 people, let alone have a single security person on that team. And so that ability, it's like me trying to stop an NFL lineman. And I'm, if anybody has known me, I'm a 5'10", 160-pound guy. It's just not going to happen, right?
You look fit, though. You look fit, Rob.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and listen, follow up on that. So, to me, I kind of, in my mind, things have really changed since a couple things have happened. Post-pandemic, so we're all working remotely. The advent of cloud and all of that, so now our environments are borderless. There's no more notion of building a moat around your company. But I also think there's elements of generational change, and wanted to just kind of delve into that a little bit. Like, is the younger type hacker different than the older generation, or do you think it's these the confluence of all these other things kind of coming together today? That's causing that for, it's not about an individual anymore. We're going after corporations and large brands and things. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been huge generational shifts. If you were to look at the earliest days, hacking was mostly considered pranking. Like you'd have colleges where one would want to, kind of do something to the other college and stir the pot a little bit. And it was kind of all done in good fun, right? And you just think of, hey, maybe you build an app where it just opens 100 windows or makes an embarrassing photo or something, on your desktop, and you do weird things like that. And then hacking kind of took a dark side, which is, okay, it's not just for fun, it's how do I turn this into a criminal enterprise? And most people would use the term, let's call criminal activity or black hat hacking. I kind of use the generic media term of hacking, which I know some people might disagree with. But as we see, it went there. First, what we saw was government agencies really take interest in it because, hey, maybe you don't want to bomb a country, but can I steal information through hacking clandestine methods and computer network exploitation? So places and, three-letter agencies did that. And then, lo and behold, we started seeing where we had all of these leaks of how they were doing things, right? And those three-letter agencies' secrets became open sourced when you had Vault 7 leaks and other things that were happening. And now the bad actors got to say, oh, let me clone what governments have spent hundreds of millions of dollars building, and now that becomes more weaponized. And as I mentioned earlier, then we also had the criminal ransomware groups who really took advantage of this and saw this as a very fruitful business model. Some of the studies that I've seen have shown ransomware as, almost like a top 10 country for how much it's stealing from companies these days. So when we start to look at it, it doesn't look promising. I think the only solution that we really have left is, do we get to a future where we're banning ransomware payments because the enabling of future capabilities is just going to be too high to leave on the table for companies?
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think what I was always fascinated with is there's always that kind of lore of the hacker in the basement of their parents' house, but these are actually like incorporated businesses that have HR departments. They're much more sophisticated from a business perspective than I think people recognize. And what is it on the dark web now? You can it's like ransomware, like the wine club ransomware of the month. What flavor do you want to try to get out there? And kind of makes you wonder. Social media has been kind of a part of this whole culture. But particularly social media in the age of AI. I mean, how do we see that? Is that going to exponentially accelerate hacks, or how are you seeing this out in the wild?
So social media really makes it easy to connect to a lot of people and a lot of targets, right? I can find people who look interesting to me. So if I was going to go after a company today, I might look on LinkedIn to find database administrators because they're going to have access to bulk data sources that I care about. And then do I craft some sensitive messages that says, hey, I just saw that you were at the last Boy Scout event. Cool. I'm looking to learn more. Let me show you some of the things that we're doing to help. Just open this PDF of our service offerings. And then I go to town. So it's a huge enabler. Plus, it also is very hard for cybersecurity organizations to stop. So usually we're used to bad actors targeting our employees through email. Very simple. We put email security gateways in place, things like a Proofpoint, to stop those attacks. But what happens when the bad actors start targeting our employees over SMS, or if they start targeting over LinkedIn messages or over Slack? And if our employees are opening these services on their laptops, maybe these are things we can't actually put a security gateway solution in front of. And now it becomes very hard for us to stop when they click these phishing, smishing, other types of attacks.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's, being in cyber, I'm leery of everything. And, you get those kind of, postal service text messages with a link to track your package, and you just don't know, like, is it real or is it not real? I don't know how to navigate these days, Ross.
And it only actually gets worse. And I'll just give you the example. Before, maybe the bad actor may have came from a country in Nigeria and they did a Nigerian scam. Well, their ability to know the English language was limited based on how much they studied in school. But now, if they go and they ask ChatGPT to rephrase this phishing email, it's going to come out with better English than I have. Yeah. Right? And so that barrier to make it very enticing, you just put a phrase in there that says, make this phishing email more catchy, right? And it gets so easy for them to write these very carefully worded, enticing emails to open.
It's, what was I reading too, that, generative AIs kind of also open the door to some of the more difficult languages, right? Like in Arabic, or where you're starting to see in the Middle East that they're, able to exploit in countries that previously would have been very difficult, to your point, on the language front. Another area that I think is really fascinating, sorry, Vince, I love this topic, is hacktivism. And, I think we really saw a sense of that, right, with the whole Ukraine, Russia, when there was the cyber army of volunteers, right, and kind of on both sides. But how do you see that kind of changing or evolving? Are we seeing more people getting politically motivated or socially activated, or are they kind of looking into expanding into other areas where they put their efforts?
Certainly, I think there's always going to be people who want to support a cause. You could be pro-Israel, you could be anti-Iran, you could be pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia. Whatever it is, you're going to have people who support specific causes. And because of that, then they're going to do things that are borderline unethical and illegal, right? And it's hard to say where those lines truly are when you're going to war against a foreign country. Typically hacking is considered illegal. But if it's against a foreign country that's invading you, there's probably, some ends justify the meanness in this resolve. And so I think we're going to see more of this, right? There's certainly a lot of wars, and if you're any kind of believer in religion, there's probably a lot more wars coming before a second coming of some sort. So I think we're going to only see more of this. The question is, how can, organizations understand if they're being attacked by all these hacktivism groups, what is it they need to do? Mm-hmm. Because now, instead of it's just large entities that may be tracked, is this, thousands of people that they have to now start protecting against.
Yeah, Ross, maybe the last question on, hackers and code of conduct and things like that, but up until now, and it's been great information and great insight, we're talking about hackers in a negative kind of way. And there's actually, the flip to that. In the world, the bad guys are usually the black hats and the good guys are usually the white hats. When you're working with, and there's value in that, there's bug bounty programs out there, things like that. But, when you work with your peers, like, how are you guys seeing organizations actually adopt the white hat, the ethical hacking side of the equation?
So first and foremost, there are good tools that companies buy, which bad actors also buy. And I'll just give you an example. Acunetics. It's a very common dynamic application security scanning tool that companies may use, just like Burp Suite, to scan their websites for vulnerabilities. Well, guess what? If the bad actors buy that same software and start scanning your tools, they can find the vulnerabilities that your team should have found as well. And so good tools can be used nefariously. And certainly this isn't just limited to commercial tools. It can also be open source tools. So what happens is you have someone with very honest, pure intentions that they're like, hey, I'm doing my PhD in cybersecurity. I'm researching. Here's a really cool way that, Chrome is misconfigured and people can break into it. I'm sharing this with the world because I want to improve Chrome security. Thank you. That's amazing. I'm glad we have smart people like those researching those things. Well, then bad actor says, well, let me weaponize this so I can get, thousands of grandma's social security numbers, credit cards, things like that. And that's where it's a really tricky line to say, did this good person with good intentions build something that can be used for evil? And is there a way we should have prevented that? And it's a tough line because we want to encourage good security research, but at the same time, if that security research ultimately only causes harm, is that really good research we should be focusing on?
Thank you. Maybe shifting gears. I'm to understand that you oversee a CISO Village, which is a community of, from what I understand, hundreds of CISOs that you're engaging with on a regular basis. Can you share with us in that construct, like, what are some of the biggest issues that you and your peers are talking about and facing in that role? Because that's a tough chair to be in these days.
Yeah,
Very
so
valuable one, but.
I work at a venture capital company called Team8, and what we do is we build a village of CISOs. And so think of, hey, I'm constantly meeting hundreds of CISOs and asking them, hey, what's going well in our industry? What tools do you wish were a little bit better? What things do we not even have tools for? And collecting all of that feedback. And then I also get a chance to meet with hundreds of vendors at like RSA and Black Hat and other events like those entities. And now we take all of that and we say, okay, it sounds like CISOs generally believe that data loss prevention tools aren't working as good as desired. Sounds like it's still very early days in AI security tools and how we're going to stop, let's say malicious models in our LLMs or other, secure things like corporate intellectual property from being uploaded. How do we look into those things? And so a big thing of what we do is we build this network of asking CISOs what's wrong so we can figure out what kind of companies we should be building to solve these problems. And then the other piece that I spend a lot of time on is creating content to help CISOs. And you just think about it. The CISO is really the only role in cybersecurity where you're not reporting to a cybersecurity leader. Right? And so you're kind of on an island. At best, you may have a CIO or CTO in the C-suite you can talk to about things technical, but you're mostly talking to non-technical audiences, the chief finance officer, the chief revenue officer, legal officer, those other people. And so being able to see, hey, what are other CISOs doing in similar roles to me at other companies so I can learn those things. So problems like third-party risk management, building an effective vulnerability management program, things that are never going away, but how do we optimize those based on lessons learned and best practices in other companies? Those are things that I really try to share. And we have monthly webinars, we have position papers, we have a lot of things to bring content to CISOs to help them in that role.
Nice. I've heard of also BISOs, right? Kind of as the companion to the CISO. Are you seeing more of those kind of roles getting stood up?
Yeah, so BISO or ISO or ISSM, kind of three synonymous names, a Business Information Security Officer, is someone who reports to cyber, but is usually forward positioned into the developer armies. And so if you think about, hey, when I was at Capital One, I had essentially a BISO role as a segment CISO. And what I would do is I would meet with them and say, hey, here's all of your developers. Here's how many vulnerabilities they have. These are applications that they're trying to do brand new launches on. Let's review the architecture of those things. Here's a couple things where they're going to violate a security policy. And sometimes it makes a lot of sense. Why would we spend, $10 million on a security policy implementation if the software never actually makes more than that? And so it's a negative ROI issue. And so you'll just accept the risk on some of those things where it doesn't make sense. And it could be things like, hey, we bought this software which runs our MRI software at a hospital. Well, this vendor's gone out of business 5 years ago. We're not patching it. We're not doing anything to this Windows XP machine. It's terrible. We all know it. We all agree to it. We're going to isolate it, but we're going to keep it alive because the average cost of an MRI, which we can bill customers, is essentially worth, keeping this thing around. So having those discussions and helping provide that cyber point of view is really, really key. And it really gives you an understanding of the role of a CISO without actually being a CISO. So I think if someone is going to become a CISO, doing a tour as an ISO or a BISO is really, really important. It gives you those experiences. It helps you learn how to influence, because that's really the role of a CISO. You have to convince people to do things who aren't under your managerial control, right? All the developers report to the CIO, not the CISO. And so because of that, having that influence and those things that you learn in those roles is really key.
Hey, Ross, I just want to pull that thread a little bit too. Like, you're starting to see reporting lines change. They haven't changed massively, but usually the CISO was a direct report into the CIO, and then that CIO either to the CFO or the CEO. I have the privilege of meeting with a lot of CISOs, and I am starting to see them actually move more into the C-suite, so to speak, and more are actually reporting right into the CEO. Are you seeing that in your CISO village, or are you still seeing mostly it's a role sitting in the IT side under a CIO role?
So I'm definitely seeing an up-leveling of roles. And so if you just think about a large organization, you may have directors, you may have vice presidents, which actually tends to make you an officer of the company. Then you could have, let's call it an SVP and an EVP, a senior vice president or an executive vice president. And historically, CISOs have been buried into the IT organization. Most of them have been up-leveled because of their requirements to brief a board or to brief the executive leadership team. Now, still today, I would say at least 50% report to the CIO. Some people like this, some people hate it. There's pros and cons because of the conflict of interest. The CIO wants to keep high availability, and when you're focused on keeping high availability, you don't want to always be patching and taking down systems. So that's where the conflict comes. Personally, one of the things that I like is what the banking industry has done. They have created a role called the chief risk officer, who's required to report to the CEO and have a report directly to the board. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I never think that the CISO should directly report to the CEO, because the CEO is so busy that you have very, very limited time and it's hard to have effective change. And cyber is only one of many risks. There's the risk of the company going out of business. There's mergers and acquisition risks and all these other things. So I do think in a lot of organizations it makes sense to move the role from the CISO from reporting to the CIO to reporting to the chief risk officer, where they have an opportunity to get broadened across all the other risks and even grow into that chief risk officer if they truly want a reporting authority role to the CEO once they have that broader business context.
Yeah, that's really great perspective, right? Because it's such tricky waters organizationally, right? On how to structure it and for it to be maximum impact, right? I mean, there's just a lot of headwinds that have to be faced, and I'm a big fan of CISOs because it's just not an easy job.
It's not.
And speaking of risk, I'm really curious. As you look at today's landscape, there's already tons and tons of, kind of data and privacy, compliance standards, and, with AI coming online and they're figuring out regulations there. How can CISOs navigate compliance waters today? It just seems it's getting more expansive. I think, I forgot, 60% of countries or 70% of countries already have, certain, regulations in place that sting too, right? If you're in violation. And for any company that has a global footprint, how can you make sure that you're in compliance and, you're not running afoul in one country and not another?
So the first thing I will say is a CISO's focus on one particular standard is going away. And I know you may say, well, why would we ever go away from NIST or ISO or GDPR or CCPA? And it's because if you're a global country and you're in or a global company in 200 countries, you have 200 standards. You don't have one to focus on. You have 200. And so because of that, you need to map to a universal compliance framework, something like Secure Controls Framework, SCF, which does that mapping to all those standards for you. And then once you have this universal list of controls, you can say, we're going to do these controls, And then if we have evidence to show that we did these controls, and here's a mapping to any standard. So pick your random agency overseas who says, hey, we need to see you met our local standard. You can show them. And that's really the easy way to do things. But I will say it is extremely complicated because of data locality and privacy laws. So one of the hardest things that CISOs are now encountering right now is laws being passed that says you need to keep our data from our citizens in our country. Okay, makes sense. Why would we want our data to leave our country? Totally get that. But what happens is the IT department is making decisions that says we're going to use SaaS-based solutions. So they're going to buy Workday to do all of HR and training and things like that. And now you have to go to Workday and say, hey, did you realize we're actually in 200 countries? And they're like, yeah, I had no clue. Don't care about your company. Just buy our software. Okay. We want your Workday to have a local instance in China, in Russia, and Indonesia, and India, and all these countries that we're in. Yeah, Workday says, we're not going to do that. Go pound sand. So now the CIO and the CISOs are stuck in this position where their local regulators are saying, hey, we want the data to only be in China. And yet at the same time, their third-party SaaS solutions don't even offer those capabilities. And so that's a really weird place to be in, and going to be in a lot of legal hot water going forward, because we have this thing where we're trying to reduce the IT costs by not having to build everything in-house. But at the same time, the laws are not consistently giving that same direction.
I'm going to jump in, Ross. Like up till now, in my role, I have the privilege of speaking to a lot of CISOs, and I'm hearing some themes come out here in our conversation with you. Talked a little bit about tools, security tools, and I can tell you when I talk to CISOs, a lot of them, conversation goes to the fatigue and the complexity of tools and how we have to simplify our environments to really get our arms around it. And then now, just recently, a little bit about the compliance part. Probably the third topic that is pretty basic, but it's a big issue in the industry still. It's getting a little bit better, but is around just talent management. I mean, again, I go back to after the pandemic, there was a term coined, the big quit. A lot of people just decided they weren't going to come back. I think you're seeing more and more people are in the workforce or want to be in the workforce, but folks sitting in roles like yours, the biggest issue is, do they have the actual experience and talent necessary? Like, is that still a big topic for you and the folks you talk to?
So I think there's a lot of talent out there. And if anybody doesn't believe there's a shortage or there's a lot of talent, I would say, imagine you're a CISO for a day. How many emails do you get from people offering to provide contracting services for you? You will literally get dozens of those emails every single day. So I think the talent's there. Now, where I think the disconnect is in the executive leadership teams. And I'm talking the CEOs, the CFOs, and those executive leaders. Most of those people are in their 50s today, which means when they grew up as kids, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have smartphones, they went over to their neighbor's house and they played sports or whatever they did. Versus if you take these people who were born in the mid-'80s, right, these kind of senior directors, first-time leaders in the early C-suite type roles, those folks grew up, in their 20s using smartphones, calling friends, playing on social media and other things like that. And so they actually really enjoy these remote hybrid experiences. So we kind of have some generational differences where the old generation loves the in-person experience. They want to socialize. They want to have happy hours and lunches and meet with people. And then you have the young kids who say, hey, I freaking hate this 1 hour commute to work. I want to live where my friends live, where I went to college, in these small towns where, there's not a lot of job opportunities. Just give me a remote opportunity that's 100% remote. And so good companies that are not flexible on 100% remote are losing out on really, really good quality talent. And so I think that's the biggest generational difference right now. And I'm hoping that will change. But I'm starting to see the shift back where they're starting to say everybody has to be in the office at Amazon and Microsoft and these big type places. And my fear is it's going to take another 15 years for this older generation of folks who didn't grow up with the remote first mentality of calling your friends on the phone. And when that shift happens, then we'll see more of it. But it was a nice trial during COVID, but it wasn't lasting from my impressions of large companies.
Yeah, where do the majority of the CISOs you work with on a daily basis, where do they fall in that? Because usually that's a policy that comes from very high up, but as employees of a company, people at the top set the direction, and we're asked to execute against that. But what's the mindset of a CISO who's really looking for that talent? Are they buying more into that remote is perfectly fine for the right person?
So I think CISOs, because we're much more tech focused and leaning, we're very into this remote workspace. So I think we're very supportive of it. And the big thing I would say, and I learned this from a really good friend of mine, is if you really want this 100% to work, you need to increase your travel budget. Because you still want to have times when people can have in-person meetings at large conferences or other things and do those connections. And it can be very, very successful. But that being said, oftentimes these decisions are made at executive levels above the CISO. So the CISO just really has to salute and follow. And in those cases, what I'm seeing today is there's predominantly a hybrid solution that requires people to be in the office 3 to 4 days a week, and then they can flex from home 1 to 2 days a week. I think that's the most common model that we're seeing today.
Yep. Seeing that as well.
I like that model. It's kind of, the best of both worlds, if you will. It's been fascinating to track this topic, though, Ross. I mean, as you mentioned, some of these, Amazon's been in the news a lot. Dell was in the news, when they had been remote, or, you didn't have to come into the office for years. And then all of a sudden that changed. And I forgot how many employees basically said, no, we'll give up any kind of future career advancement or future raises or whatever it was, because they just weren't willing to come back in the office. I mean, do you see kind of the employees, as they band together, is that the opportunity to try to, kind of force the issue in a way with senior management at some of these companies to keep good talent, or is good talent going to walk out of the door at the expense of, being forced to be in the office every day of the week?
I think good talent is going to walk out the door. And a lot of times we frame it as, well, the employees just don't want to be in the office 3 to 5 days a week. And I think we are oversimplifying some of these root causes people are leaving. And I'll just share my personal example. I lived in Nashville for the last 4 years working at Caterpillar and had a great time working in that company. And then what happened was my dad started having a lot of personal health issues. And I'm only child, right? There's no other kids to take care of my parents, just me. And so because of that, there was a need for me to move back to Las Vegas if I wanted to spend more time and have more memories with my parents and create those memories for my children to have those opportunities. And so I told my company that, hey, I needed a 100% role where I could be permanently based here, or I was going to leave the company. And unfortunately, that didn't work with Caterpillar. They still had a focus on being in these 3 locations of their big hubs. And so because of that, I absolutely walked out the door. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to have aging parent issues. And it may not just be their parents, it could be their spouses, who have their parents have health issues, as we have these generations living longer and longer. And now we have to help our families. And I think that's the right thing to do from a family perspective. Agreed. And so do you really want to lose your best employees? Some companies are going to say yes. Personally, I would not make those same decisions.
Yeah, agreed. The flexibility is nice, and I think you have happier workers, more productive workers, when they have that kind of flexibility. At least what I've observed, and like the folks that I manage, and what it's enabled them to do. I think, to your point, to help family members or otherwise, because time is precious. You don't get that time back. And I think as parents, get older, every year is precious, even more precious. So I'm 100% on board with that, Ross. Absolutely. Earlier you had mentioned, kind of DLP tools and things like that, which is another fascinating topic today, right? With this whole explosion of AI and generative AI, and how can CISOs or companies, how do they need to evolve their data security practices? Because it would be so easy to not even thinking about it. Hey, we got a product launch coming up. I'm going to put some thoughts into, Chat GPT to help me with like a marketing plan, or, some kind of, is it some development work, for example? I mean, how can you wrap your arms around something that has just taken off and is just growing exponentially with new websites coming up every single day for generative AI?
Yeah, it's really, really tough. The first thing I will say is, as an organization, we can't even determine what an application is anymore. It used to be, you had to go get a server, you need to go install, Java or something as a web application, then you ran it. And now what the definition of an application is so hard to say. Is every page on a wiki page its own individual application, or is only the wiki one app? And the same thing could be said for every SharePoint site that's out there. And what about an Amazon S3 bucket? Is every individual S3 bucket its own web application if it hosts code? And then are you going to require every individual bucket to have a robust disaster recovery plan and meet all the different security compliance controls separately? It gets very, very difficult to even determine what the minimum application is. And now after that, then you're going to say, well, even if we could understand what every application was in our organization, we now have to figure out which ones are talking to third parties, which might be sending data to LLMs, ChatGPT, things like that. And so this is where staying in touch with the cutting edge ecosystem and venture partners is really, really key. You're going to go and you're going to start learning about companies that take things from a very, very different approach. And so instead of, hey, how do I inventory everything? Maybe what we do is we look at companies like Grip Security and others that they look at all of your emails to say, oh, did you realize here's all these companies that are sending you EULAs and you haven't logged in these, and then they can start inventorying all these LLMs that you're using. Or you're looking at it from DNS logs and traffic. So there's a lot of different ways that we're going to solve this. Personally, I think it's going to be too hard for one company to focus on this, and it's going to be something where we're buying solutions. And what I would say is, because this space is changing so fast, it's really important you're going to these conferences where you can understand the changing ecosystem, because what was good 2 years ago may not be the best mousetrap today that you need to really be buying, and how it solves these things. So every 2-3 years when you're doing your let's say new contract renewals, are you going and doing a really good evaluation to see who are these emerging startups that are bringing the technology to solve these problems?
Hey, Ross, I wanted to drill in on something you said earlier when you were talking to your peers, and you talked a little bit about DLP, and couldn't remember exactly your words, but you and your community feel like in that genre of technology, things are lacking. And, on this podcast, one thing Rachael and I try to do is keep our own brand's bias kind of out of it. But we are a kind of a leader in DLP. What we're finding in the field when we're having conversations is DLP is actually in vogue again. It was kind of something that was really important, a decade ago or so, and then all of a sudden it became kind of passé. But in this world of borderless environments where, like you said, I mean, I loved your concept of what is an app, but, most people, businesses and people are conducting commerce over web channels, cloud channels, things like that. But what we're finding is DLP is actually, there's an uptick in the desire to use that technology, but it's being prepended with a technology called DSPM, Data Security Posture Management, where we're living in these borderless remote worlds now where our data is everywhere, what we're finding is CISOs and companies are actually really putting an importance on discovering where their data is, classifying it, and then protecting it through DLP policies, and then building kind of a whole monitoring environment around that, to where that's not a one-time, it's a 360-degree kind of view that they continually run and monitor. Do you subscribe to that thinking, or do you have a different opinion?
Yeah, so we've really changed over the past 5 years. And what I'll say is, before then, it was very abnormal to see a lot of data scientists in most companies. And we love data scientists. They provide us new insights on our data, and they help us understand how we can make more money, sell more widgets, and things like that. And so what has happened is these traditional places of our data only lives in these dev, test, prod servers isn't the case anymore. Right. Developers and these data scientists are taking the data, putting it on their local laptops, massaging the data, doing ETL, and moving it to all different places. And so the CIO and the CISO have no idea where all their data is today, right? Which means it's very hard to protect it when you don't even know where in the network it is. Right. And so if all of a sudden you have this giant unknown, you have to start with okay, we need to scan all of our system locations to figure out where our PII, PHI data is being stored at. So that's really the first thing. And we have to classify, and we have to have low false positive rates, because otherwise we're chasing down millions of files that, are wasting everybody's time and costing resources and money. And then let's say you get to that place to where you've classified all of your data appropriately. Your next thing is, how do I actually make sure that data can't be stolen by some bad actor or by some, let's call it dumb intern, who doesn't know where to put the data, and they put it in places it shouldn't go. And that's another really, really tricky thing. We've had a really bad history of limiting access. And you can just think of, I'll give you the example. Let's say Rachael here was on the accounting team and had all the access to the accounting data. Perfect. We love that. We want accountants to have access to that. Now she changes from the accounting team to go over to the comptroller team. Did we remove all of her Windows share drives, all of her SharePoint folders and access, and every other file that someone has manually shared with her? Probably not. We might have removed some application access, but maybe not every folder and every file. And so now if Rachael gets spearphished because she clicks on that dodgy link, do the bad actors still have access to all of her old accounting data, which she shouldn't have anymore? And that blast radius only grows. I think if you were to ask how many files does the average employee in a company have, you would see hundreds of thousands of files once someone's been there for over a year. And so these things have got to change, because it's not going to be a positive outcome. And then, our regulators are going to hang us out to dry when they're like, why didn't you remove Rachael's accesses? There's no reason she should have still kept those. And you're like, you're absolutely right. And so I think we're going to go into a place of, what does least privilege really look like for data, for files, for access? If you haven't opened this file in 6 months, remove the access. We're going to make a really streamlined process where you can get access to the files in 10 minutes when you ask for and you have a legitimate business justification. But if you haven't used it, you're going to lose it. And so I think that's the shift that we need to see. That's where the DLPs that are doing this automated removal of access are really interesting. The hard thing is there's just a huge trust right now, which is, are you going to take away files that I need access to, and how will I be able to recover that? And so that's kind of these internal politics that CISOs are having to overcome right now if we're going to go for a better, more secure future.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm cognizant of time, but I did tease this at the beginning, so I want to make sure we have an opportunity to talk about it. What inspired you to create the OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix, and how can organizations use it?
So I built the OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix when I became a CISO at Caterpillar. Essentially, when I came into the role, I think like most other CISOs, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be the CISO who causes a breach because I didn't think all the things through and do all the smart things. And what I found was most of the guidance and recommendations were based on policies, and policies do not reflect today's real threats. And if you just think about it, if you were to go and look at NIST or look at CIS 18, there's some good things in there. And they're going to tell you, hey, we need to inventory all of your assets. That's like one of your first controls. Well, you could never finish that activity because we can't even define what an asset is in an application. But at the same time, we're seeing the bad actors pivot faster than our standards and our controls can be updated. And if you just go to look at the Verizon data breach report, you would see most actors are using identity-based attacks, right, to really focus right now. And if that's the number one attack vector, I need to build a defense in depth plan that says, how am I going to stop identity-based attacks? Hence why I came up with the OWASP threat and safeguard matrix. What you do is you put each of the threats on additional rows, and then you use the NIST functions of how would I identify where these things could happen? Okay, what are all the systems I have to worry about identity-based attacks on? Then, once I know those systems, what are the things where I could automatically stop the attacks, i.e. the protect phase? And if I couldn't protect them and the identity attacks happened, how would I detect those things? You know, do I have a SIM? Do I have logging monitoring? Do I have something where I would measure and notice? And so you go through these 5 phases of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, and use these threat-based approaches. And when you do this, you have a robust defense in depth plan. And I just think this is so much better than what we were previously doing. Someone would say, hey, it's a material risk, throw it on the risk register, which is like a 3-line thing that says, we will mitigate this risk. And I can't imagine going to war with a country and saying, oh, Russia's a risk, we're just going to put them on a little risk register that says, if they attack, we'll attack back. Like, I just think that is totally trivial for material risk to companies. So building these defense in depth plans of the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover is really how we start to think very creatively and build robust plans of defense. So if you haven't taken a look, please just Google search OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix. I'm sure there'll probably be a link in the show notes, but it's some of the best work I've come up with in order to protect companies.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, getting organized and having a plan is so important. You know, just doing that work, right, can make such a difference when things happen. Well, Ross, I really want to thank you for your time today. This has been a very insightful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We hit on some of my favorite topics, particularly when we talk about hackers. I can never get enough about hackers. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
Of
Ross.
course, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to learn more, please reach out to me, connect on LinkedIn. Also, as mentioned before, OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix or CISO Tradecraft are fantastic ways to learn more on cyber. And last but not least, if you are a CISO and you want to get more involved with the teammate, happy to help you and show you all the cool things we're doing there.
Wonderful. And let's not forget to give a plug for your own podcast, the CISO Tradecraft podcast, which you're a co-founder of. So
thank you.
Folks can go check out more there. Well, to all of our listeners, thank you again for joining us this week and for another awesome conversation. And as always, what do we like to do, Vince?
Smash that like button.
That's right. Smash it. Smash it. Subscribe and get a fresh episode
Absolutely.
every single Tuesday. So until next time, everybody, stay safe.